Do you struggle with bloating, inflammation, weight gain in your lower belly, just feeling anxious, feeling scattered? Then maybe you have high cortisol, as many of us do. And so on today's episode, that is exactly what we're going to be chatting about. I am here in Austin, Texas with one of my amazing friends, Maddie Miles. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Maddie is the founder of Peace of Hormones and Mastic. She is a clinical herbalist, and then she is also an integrative health practitioner. So she is my go-to person whenever I have any hormone questions, and it's just such a blessing to know you. So I'm so excited to be diving into this topic today with you, because I think lowering cortisol is something so many people want to know more about, and you are just the right person to interview on this.
So thank you. Honored to be back on the podcast a few years later as well.
Yes. If you guys have been long-term listeners, Maddie came on my podcast in, I think it was early 2022 or late 2021.
Yeah.
So it's been a while. I'm so happy to have you back. Yes. And if you guys want to tune back into that other episode, I'll have it linked in the description. That time we talked all about the female body and optimizing your hormones. So today we're going to go specifically into cortisol, which I'm really excited about. So just as a little overview, can you explain what is cortisol? What are the benefits of cortisol, and what are the downsides?
So cortisol is a glucocorticoid, which is a form of steroid hormone. It's produced by the adrenal glands. Cortisol itself is commonly referred to as the stress hormone. There are really a group of these air quote stress hormones that are produced when we are in a state of sympathetic nervous system mode, which is our fight or flight, and our more stressed state. So cortisol is one of the many hormones that are produced. We also have adrenaline, we have noradrenaline. Other words for that are epinephrine and norepinephrine. We also have dopamine sometimes as well in stressful situations that is produced. We have aldosterone. So we have various hormones that are being produced and kickstarted when we are in a stressed out state. Cortisol is usually the one that gets the most attention and sometimes a bad rep as well. Although in the short term, cortisol is actually very healthy. Cortisol is anti-inflammatory in the short term. And in the long term, like with anything that is done to the extreme or just a state that we are in chronically, that's when we start to reap some negative consequences. So chronically, producing high levels of cortisol, well then we are actually pro-inflammatory. We as in cortisol. Cortisol, it gets a lot of attention for the right reasons, because most of us are chronically stressed from just many different things going on in our lives. And I think it's important to also mention that stress comes in so many different forms. A lot of people get some functional labs back and they'll see that their glucose is much higher than it should be. Perhaps they're experiencing some insulin issues because of chronically elevated glucose, and their DHEAS is lower and their progesterone's lower. Their estrogen is maybe higher, or maybe it's normal, but they're experiencing estrogen dominance because progesterone is lower and testosterone is lower. And so people are like, what's going on? And then their practitioner may say something about, well, it's probably because you're stressed. And that is definitely not like the only answer that should be given, but it's definitely a part of the equation. And it can be frustrating to hear that sometimes, especially if you're someone who wouldn't consider yourself a stressed out person. Now, there are usually two archetypes of people who don't think that they're stressed out. So there's archetype number one, who is in that like kind of first stage of stress where it's like you're experiencing the high cortisol, high DHEA, high testosterone, high dopamine, high estrogen, high hormones. And so you feel kind of good, like you feel really energized and really wired. But it's almost like how you feel after drinking a cup of like matcha or coffee or caffeine, like you feel energized and good. And then you start to get into like the resistance stage, which is stage 2 of stress, and then into the adrenal dysfunction, which used to be coined adrenal fatigue. And many practitioners and researchers have really moved away from that, because it's not that our adrenals are tired and fatigued. They're not functioning how they should be. They're functioning in a different way because of the lifestyle that we're living and or because of other underlying issues going on in our body that is causing stress on the body. So a lot of people are like, well, I don't feel very stressed, like I go to my yoga every single morning, and I've talked to plenty of women who are like, well, I'm not stressed. I don't drink coffee and I work from home, so I don't have to sit in the car in traffic to get to work. And like, I don't feel stressed, you know, I have a healthy relationship. I love my life. And it's important to recognize that stress is so much more than just mental and emotional stress. You don't need to be going through a midlife crisis or going through a breakup with a friend or with a partner or be unhappy with your job. You don't need to be moving in order to be stressed. You could be stressed because you have gut issues going on, and that those gut imbalances, the gut dysbiosis, is causing inflammation in the body. Inflammation is the root of most of the acute and chronic illnesses that we are experiencing as humans. And when inflammation, it's just like cortisol. Acute term, inflammation is good. Long term, it's not good. So anyway, that's a long way of answering what is cortisol, put in a very easy, simple way. It's a stress hormone that gives us the fuel, gives our body and our mind the fuel to cope with everyday stressors.
Thank you for that very intricate answer. And I think most people who listen to Inner Growth identify with being perfectionistic and having a lot of high standards for themselves, or being high performers, being type A, being the types of people that just tend to feel a little bit disconnected from the feminine, to feel like that like fight or flight, go, go, go energy a lot of the times, which I think is why a lot of my like feminine energy topics on the podcast tend to be some of my best performing episodes. And I think a huge part of tapping into your feminine is learning to slow down, is learning to reduce your stress so that you can be in that receiving mode, so that you can be in that restful state and then have better hormone health and have all these other positive effects. And I want to kind of rewind a little bit and explain also even why I want to dive into this topic personally. I'm someone who has struggled with stress most of my life because I'm the type of girl that just tends to put too much on my plate, and then I'm constantly just juggling so many things at once. And for a very long time, I want to say since 2020, I was someone who just had an overstimulating morning routine where I would wake up, have a banana, chug an espresso, go for a workout, not have like a proper balanced breakfast until like 2 hours, 3 hours after waking up. And I've always kind of struggled with a little bit of that like lower belly fat area and being like, am I bloated? Why is this a struggle I have? I feel so strong in every single other area of my life, but that's just where I like hold my weight. And over the last like month, basically, ever since I ran my half marathon, my body just really needed a break. So after the half marathon, I really slowed down and kind of changed my routine unintentionally, where I started having breakfast right away after waking up. I kind of stopped drinking coffee and started having matcha. I started drinking my matcha like 2 hours after waking up. And I also stopped working out first thing in the morning and started doing workouts at like 5 p.m. like to end off my day, and not working out every single day either. And then I started to notice that my bloating went down a lot. And then the more I started to think about it, the more I was like, these are the things I changed, and these were the things I resisted changing for years. And now that I finally did it, I'm like feeling the results. I posted about this, and then some people in the comments were like, well, did you get your cortisol levels checked? And I'm like, this happened in the last month. Like, I did not go and do a cortisol test to like for sure have the right yes. But I wanted to get your take on like, why do you think I am experiencing these positive results? Do you think it has to do with this? Because even in my luteal phase, when I'm usually very bloated, I'm like not as bloated. So what do you think? What are your thoughts
Well, first
on
of all,
this?
that's amazing. And I'm really proud of you for recognizing that you needed to take a step back and actually listening to it, because it's very rare that I hear people doing that nowadays. It doesn't matter whether it's a woman or it's a man or what age they are. I feel like everyone is just pushing themselves to the max, especially after like the whole movement of like biohacking, where it's like, we can biohack things. And it's like, no, you can't really, you can, but like at an expense of some aspect of your health that eventually is going to give in. And by the way, like I've heard and seen it all in my, what has seemed like very long, but also short at the same time, because I have so much of my life yet left to continue to research and to experience and to have my clinic and everything. But I mean, I've heard it all. Like I've also heard people who are really health conscious who are trying to biohack their way out of sleeping. So like I've heard crazy things, right? And I've seen crazy things. Anyway, again, it's like at what expense? Like, yeah, sure, you get a few extra hours to be productive, but like you're not sleeping and your body is not going to respond well to that in the short or long term. So yes, everything is connected. You know, you're not just like magically feeling better. like things have been happening, right, in order for you to reduce the bloat. I don't know if you explicitly said this, but like reduce the lower belly like fat that was holding on. So for sure, like my answer is yes. Like cortisol has a huge part. It's not just cortisol because everything in our body orchestrates together. So all the hormones, all the neurotransmitters, our nerves, our intestinal lining, everything, like we have our cells all over our body, trillions of cells. So everything is communicating with one another constantly, day in and day out. And so, yes, I believe that cortisol was a huge part of that for you, reducing your cortisol. Another thing I will say about, you said you moved your workouts from the morning to the evening. So this is great. If someone is listening to this is like, I don't want to work out at 5 p.m., right? Like it doesn't have to be that late. It just is best if it's not done first thing in the morning, generally speaking, like in the luteal phase and when you're on your period. We have melatonin that gets us asleep and then cortisol that gets us awake. And that's obviously a brief overview. So it's natural that we have high cortisol in the morning, but we don't want it to be too high. And how we add more fuel to that fire is by working out first thing, especially on an empty stomach. Like that is just double fuel to the fire. Other things would be like hopping straight into work, looking at your phone, hopping on social media every single morning right when you wake up. A lot of these things add more cortisol. And cortisol plays a major role in our metabolism, in our immunity, and then of course our stress response. Most people are just like, oh, cortisol and stress, like those two are the only things. But it also plays a role in immunity, which is why a lot of people get sick or even have autoimmune issues if they've been just in this state of chronic fight or flight mode, as well as metabolism issues. I mean, we could talk about that alone for, 30 to 60 minutes about how it impacts glucose metabolism and glucose uptake from the glucose in the bloodstream into the cells. And so, a lot of people who are experts in the more natural, healthy weight loss sector of social media will always say one of the main key components when it comes to weight loss or just being at a healthy weight is blood sugar regulation and insulin sensitivity. And cortisol, again, is a glucocorticoid. Gluco is in the name. Gluco is also in glucose. So again, one of the things that it does is it manages and regulates glucose metabolism. So anyway, like long way of answering your question, yeah, I think that's definitely you've worked on regulating your cortisol by not pushing yourself through early morning workouts, even worse by pushing yourself through early morning workouts on an empty stomach or just with, banana and coffee. You're lessening the spike, and when you like wake up and you have a more calm, relaxing morning and you have that high protein breakfast, we have studies to show that it doesn't just impact your blood glucose right after your meal. Postprandial is what that's called, like the 2 hours after your meal. It helps to regulate your blood glucose throughout the entire day.
I've known this, like the importance of eating breakfast within like an hour of waking, but I always kind of tricked myself into thinking like a banana was fine. Like just a banana, like at least I'm having some glucose before the coffee. But then I changed that and now I'm like, Carolina, good thing this took you like a year or 2 years to do, but still it does make a huge difference.
So when we are stressed out and in this state of high cortisol, our central nervous system shifts more predominantly into the sympathetic nervous system. So that is our fight or flight. Again, it's okay to be in that sometimes, but as humans, as modern day humans, we seem to be chronically stuck in it at like a low level. And I always tell people you can notice if you are in that state, if something like random little moments, for example, let's say a loud noise, like someone next to you drops their phone or something loud noise, if that really sends you into, you notice like, oh my gosh, my heart rate just totally picked up. I got all flushed. My pupils dilated. And that's not like you're being chased by someone. That would be a totally different situation if you were running for your life. But if like a loud noise happened, for example, and that totally kind of sent you off into like a cortisol fight or flight, then that's a really good sign that you're just kind of humming in this low fight or flight mode day in and day out. Chronic stress. Whereas on the opposite side, if we are in our parasympathetic mode, that's our rest, our digest, right? We're able to digest our food, which is why it's important that we sit down when we eat a meal. We're not like standing up or walking around or doing chores. Like we're actually seated. So we're not using energy to move our body. And we take a few deep breaths before a meal. And it sounds so simple and just like, what? How could just a few deep breaths like help to calm me? Well, that's what it is to be a human, like that's what effect it has physiologically speaking on our body to like actually be present and take a few breaths.
And I've been doing this a lot. If I notice that I'm overstimulated or like I've been scrolling a lot and then my body's getting like shaken up and I'm like, damn, I'm definitely stressing myself out, just being like, just kind of like taking a few breaths.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's important to just be present. So being aware of your body and your mind and your breath is so important. And it just helps to guide you because naturally as humans, like we will get tense, like certain situations and moments and things will make us tense, will make our breath more shallow. I remember like one of like the most frustrating pieces of advice that I ever got for my health, even though it ended up being true and one of the most helpful, but it was so frustrating in the moment. I was working with a functional diagnostic nutritional practitioner and we ran some, cool labs that I'd never really run on myself before. This was about 4 years ago, but this was a friend of mine and she was like, I'll just do it for you on the house, like we're just kind of nerding out together. And she was like, you need to breathe more. And I was like, that's so annoying because I do, I'm like, what do you mean? I do breathe. And she's like, no, you need to breathe like more. You need to breathe deeper. Sorry, not more, but like frequently, but you need to actually breathe deeper, have more deeper breaths because your breathing is super shallow. And so it's something that I'm very aware of because if anyone studied Ayurvedic medicine or has read any books about Ayurvedic medicine, I tend to be more in that like Vata energy style where it's like head in the clouds. You're always kind of going. Especially being a business owner, I think it can be really easy to add a million things to your to-do list and put so much pressure on yourself to do all of these things and some, and to be perfect at it all because you're the runner of the show. Whereas I'm not saying that if you work for someone else and you have a boss that your life is easier, but there is something that I've noticed with entrepreneurs. We don't like sign out or sign in, it's always there. And so I am very aware of my breath and making sure that I breathe deeply, especially before meals, because it tremendously helps me digest my food.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think there are so many areas of life where people put pressure on themselves to be perfect. Obviously, being an entrepreneur, self-employed, content creator, we're completely in charge. And so I feel that so much too. But I also think like moms, like they're calling the shots in so many ways. Like they feel so much stress. Students, like you're deciding like how much you're going to study, especially if you're like a type A person and you want to get A's and you want to perform like perfectly in school, you tend to put a lot of pressure on yourself. So I think a lot of people feel that in different ways. And I want to dive into some more like tangible little mini hacks that everyone listening can implement into their life so that they can just support cortisol balance and just stay in the positive side of cortisol. It's giving that little boost. It's helping you be productive, but it's not humming constantly. It's not affecting your long-term health. So aside from taking a few deep breaths before you eat, what are some other little hacks that people can do that aren't like too difficult or expensive that would definitely help?
Great question. So first I would start off with nutrition because nutrition can really make or break our health just across the board. So I would start with nutrition and really focus on blood sugar balancing. And how you can do that is by not having what's called naked carbs. So having that banana, because I think some people who are listening to this may have said, wait, a banana is bad now? And no, that's not at all what we're saying, but it can spike your blood sugar if you're having that just by itself. So pair it up with a nice fat. Even better, pair it up with a fat and a protein. And I always start with nutrition as well because I work predominantly with women and we have just been so lied to when it comes to nutrition as a whole society, but especially for women because even in the more natural health and wellness space and the natural medicine journals and research, most of this is still being done on men. So, for example, we have some great research studies showing the benefits of intermittent fasting, where you're skipping breakfast and you're going from dinner to lunch, sometimes even dinner the next day, and you're not eating, and sometimes even drinking caffeine while not eating. And there are some studies that show that this can be really beneficial. What many people don't know is that was done on male rats, lab rats, and male human men. So this stuff doesn't just automatically translate over to women. And so I think women have been extra lied to because even a woman who is kind of air quote doing all the right things, like following Andrew Huberman, and listening to all his podcasts and reading all the books, and they're like, I know this, I know that, because I learned this there. That research is not necessarily applicable to women. And the research around women, especially women in our reproductive years where we are cycling, is just abysmal, honestly. Like, we just don't know a lot. And
It's crazy.
so
It's insane.
It's honestly disgusting, because it's like, how is like the allopathic medical system and business, how are they prescribing medications that haven't even been tested on women, to women, you know? And then in like the natural realm, like, how are we telling women to, you know, go on, like, be a carnivore or go on the keto diet or to go low carb? And again, we don't have the research to back this up. And then we just have anecdotal research, which is very important, because you have a bunch of women, over half of the population, who are struggling with fertility issues. And fertility isn't just, you know, wanting to get pregnant. Fertility is just our hormones and our reproductive health.
Ovulating.
It's our reproductive health, which is, you know, important for our bone health, for our breast health, for our brain health and development, for our immunity, for our guts, and for our digestion. It's, you know, plays a role in everything. So it's honestly, it's just abysmal. And so when it comes to nutrition, I say, like, really tune out the noise and choose foods that feel good to you, because that is the best guide, right? I had a woman see me once who wasn't eating breakfast, was drinking coffee, but she would put some oat milk in it, she said, which I was like, that's even worse. Not that oat milk is bad, but again, pairing things up, right? And then she would go work out and she wouldn't eat lunch until noon. And I was like, why are you doing that? I was just curious. And she's like, well, I heard it from here, X, Y, and Z. And I was like, well, how do you feel? And she's like, I don't feel good. And then we pulled up her labs, and her thyroid was under functioning, and, you know, some other things were off as well, estrogen dominance. So I was like, okay, let us all just understand how we're feeling and kind of use that to, like, guide us, you know? Like, if we eat a food, it may be natural, you know, all natural and organic. Maybe you can pick it up from our local farmer. But if it doesn't make us feel good, then we don't have to eat that just because another person on social media said to. So really listening to your intuition. What I say to, like, guide you is, aside from what feels good and what doesn't feel good, is to just choose real food. This one professor that I loved would always say, like, generally speaking, in grocery stores, the outside circle of the grocery store is, like, good, you know? That's like your meat, your poultry, your fruits, your vegetables, the dairy, the cheese, sometimes even like the fresh baked breads, you know, like the bakery, the fresh things, all of that stuff. And then in the center is more like just packaged processed food. And don't get me wrong, do we every once in a while enjoy that one healthy cereal brand? I think it's called like Freebird or Yellowbird or something like that. Yes. But, like, is it a health food? No. Although it's gluten-free and it's, you know, all the frees, it still isn't benefiting our health. But, you know, every once in a while we'll treat ourselves. So life is meant to be lived and enjoyed, right? And a part of living and enjoying our life is actually being healthy. So I just, you know, nutrition, I know I'm going on and on about nutrition. It's just because it's so freaking important, and it's so nuanced as well, in the way that, like, it's so bio-individual. So
learning about your body, understanding how your body responds to certain foods, being mindful and, like, observing your body actually, so you can have that information, and then trying to eat whole
Real
and
food.
processed foods as much as you can, obviously in moderation. Not eating carbs on their own to prevent blood sugar spikes, like constantly eating that, like trying to pair it with the fat, trying to pair it with the protein almost always if you can. And, like, even for me, I do that every single day, but I was still not setting myself up for success in the morning by eating that banana. Like, I love banana. Like, I was eating it every single day, but then I was experiencing the bloating. I was feeling more tired. And so I think just learning about nutrition, as you said, is so important. And what would be some other, like, rapid fire, like, overarching things aside from nutrition?
Prioritizing sleep, getting into bed, the earlier before midnight, the better. And also just doing an assessment of, do you, like, actually enjoy your life? Are you excited to get up every day? And if you're not, doing some questioning, some digging into, okay, what about it? What about our life are we not that thrilled about and excited about? And what do we have control over? Like, what can we change? What can we remove? If we can't remove something, what can we add in that makes us happy and provides us that joy every single day? So lifestyle across the board, nutrition, sleep, and just blood sugar regulation is kind of like its own category. Aside from how you could do that via food, you can do that via herbs and supplements and walks after meals, not, you know, setting yourself up for blood sugar failure in the morning by, you know, skipping breakfast or having coffee on an empty stomach and working out on an empty stomach, setting yourself up properly. And a huge part of that is sleep, because everything's connected. And the last thing I'll say are, you know, to support your nervous system, to support your stress resiliency, I love using herbal medicine for that. I think think that herbs are just a must for everyone of all ages and walks of life. There are so many herbs to choose from. Herbs, a lot of the highly medicinal ones that we've been researching have been around for upwards of 6,000 years, sometimes even longer than that. So they've truly stood the test of time, and there's a reason why they've worked so well for humans in the past and still are working so well for humans. So it's my little encouragement for anyone listening to follow along my work for herbal medicine. And, not every herb is for everyone. So if you want to learn more about herbs for your nervous system, well, then that's what I do. So come on over.
I know you mentioned bioindividuality and how every single body is so different, but do you think there are some herbs like ashwagandha, for example, that would be helpful for anyone?
Well, I love ashwagandha. Ashwagandha, when we're talking about like reducing cortisol levels to be healthy, ashwagandha is hands down one of the best herbs that we have. That's also incredibly low risk of an herb. So like there's not really any risk to taking it, just benefit. Because I know some people are a little bit confused about ashwagandha specifically, which I have a whole entire podcast episode, research article, all that stuff about ashwagandha, who it's for, who it's not, the nuances, etc. But some easier ones that people feel really comfortable with, like chamomile, passion flower, valerian root as well is a really, really great one. Lavender, lemon balm is a really great one. I have a lot of postpartum moms taking that because it's safe for breastfeeding if you're breastfeeding, and it's really great to reduce stress, and new mamas aren't sleeping much. Linden is also really great. There's again so many herbs, but there's a handful for people to kind of look into.
I love that. I don't know why I just had this thought, but there's this Hallmark show that I recently found on Netflix that I've been loving, and it's called The Good Witch. I don't know if you've heard of it before.
I haven't, no.
But basically, like, the main character in this TV show is this mom that has a store in town, and she's an herbalist. So people will come to her store and they're like, oh, I've been really struggling with migraines. And then she'll go and she'll make them like an herbal mix and send them off. And then they don't even have to go to the doctor. And I feel like you're that for me. You're like the good witch in my life, just steering me in the right direction. And so thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Let's do a little round of rapid fire questions. I do this in every episode so you can just respond intuitively. So to start out, what makes you feel like your higher self?
Helping others.
Being of service. Love that. Love that. Do you have any books that you would recommend to anyone listening?
This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, How the Pill Changes Everything by Dr. Sarah Hill. I just had her on my podcast as well. She's a friend of mine and she's brilliant. Her work is honestly, it's groundbreaking. So
I've actually heard of that book, so maybe this is my sign to go and read it. And what does inner growth mean to you?
Inner growth? Well, I just believe that as humans, we should constantly be evolving, because I don't believe that there's ever this one place where we get to where it's like all the work is done, right? Especially since my niche is natural medicine for women, and just how I mentioned earlier, like we are still learning so much about the female physiology and just about the human body and brain, especially the brain. Like, don't even get me started. We are learning so much still. And so inner growth just means understanding that we should never strive for perfectionism, because we will never be perfect. That doesn't exist, right? We can feel really, really great, and that's what we should strive for. But how can we always, like, a little bit here and there, like, improve ourselves, whether it's our spiritual growth, it's our mental growth, how we talk to ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we nourish ourselves, how we give ourselves breaks. Inner growth is just taking care of yourself. And in order to take care of yourself, we need to grow and change and evolve.
Yes. Okay, last question. If someone didn't hear anything from this episode and they just heard this part, what would you want to leave them with?
So all my ladies out there, your body is not broken. And if you have seen 10 plus specialists who have no idea what's going on with your body and you feel super, super lost, I want you to know that number one, you're not alone. That is a very common struggle for women, especially in the United States, but that there are so many naturopaths and functional and integrative practitioners and doctors out there who are really eager to help you. So you're not alone. Your body's very smart. It's doing whatever it's doing because it needs to do that in order to survive. So give it some love, some grace, and patience as it starts to heal itself.
I love that. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Can you plug
Absolutely.
yourself? Tell
Yes.
everyone listening where they can find your products, work with you if you do work one-on-one with people, and all of your socials.
Yes, so my clinic is not, I'm not accepting anyone new right now just because we're really focused on formulation and research right now. So anyone can find me though at the Maddie Miles, and then my brand is at Peace Love Hormones on Instagram. I'm sure we'll link everything up, but please connect with us on social media and listen to our podcast and watch our YouTube channel because I don't see people one-on-one, but I provide like hours and hours of free content and education that's focused around like my most commonly asked questions. So if I don't have something that you're wondering, just like drop it in a comment on YouTube or on Instagram and I'll add it to the content idea list. And then peacelovehormones.com, my herbal tinctures. Carolina has a discount code for y'all as well. And Mastic is our gum company. So we're not yet launched. We will launch in May. Natural chewing gum that actually is healthy for your oral microbiome.
Yes.
Check it out.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. And if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, head over to YouTube and give a subscribe too. And drop a like and let me know in the comments and let Maddie know in the comments what you guys thought of the episode, what you're taking away. And just remember that taking care of your stress is so important. And if you don't manage your stress and try to balance out your cortisol, achieving your optimal hormone health is probably going to be very difficult. So if you take one thing away from this episode, just let it be this reminder. Remember to water yourselves, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.